I feel like Pretzel.rocks, the music service I use, I feel like it was just trolling me a little bit. It said, did you get a haircut? It looks good. No, I haven't had a haircut in a long time. I'm starting, my mullet's really coming in now. Really lush, robust. Well, hi, it's me, Scott. Hello, how are you today? So here's the thing about all of this. This is the, I think the 11th, like, actual residency check-in stream. And I have some news on the residency. And that is that it is going to be paused for some time because, unfortunately, I need to go back to the Northwest for some medical treatment that is a little bit, I mean, it's not the most, I don't know how much to go into it, but I have to go back to the Northwest for some medical treatment, and it will be, should be fine. But it does mean that for the time being, the residency will be paused. And as you've probably noticed, if you've been paying attention or following these streams, I've been maybe, like, especially the last week or so, a little unfocused on it. And that is because I've been maybe thinking of other things, let's say, in this difficult time in the world, and unfortunately, kind of difficult time for me with some health problems. So I don't know that we need to go into any of that other than to say this may be, I don't know how the streams are going to go after this, I guess is what I want to say. I mean, I have a few more weeks in Pittsburgh, but I have to spend that time landing some other projects. And so I just am not really sure how much residency work we'll be doing. I would like to, at a minimum, say, still do the Tuesday, Thursday streams, but the daily streams may pause. So I don't know what will happen with that. But what I wanted to do today is just do the check-in, because I had my meeting yesterday with the Children's Museum, check in with ideas, get their feedback, all that, which they're always lovely and very helpful. But I'm kind of at an impasse, a crossroads, a point in the project where even if it wasn't pausing, it would be like a little bit of a line in the sand kind of moment. So I just want to talk through that a little bit. And I don't like that, I don't know. I don't want to feel like I'm making excuses, but, hopefully I'm trying to go a little easy on myself, because I think the past few months, and in particular maybe the past few weeks, have been really overwhelming for a lot of people for a lot of reasons. And I hope everyone is taking care of themselves and looking after themselves. So I'm trying to find that balance of like the right balance of self-care and paying attention to the world and doing what I can there, and then also attending to the projects. So it's a little bit of a clumsy juggle, I will say, and I don't know that I've been doing the best job. But anyway, I've been trying to take little steps forward, or at least take steps every day, and sometimes those steps are a little bit sideways. I think. So today, this may not be a very long stream. I have some new ideas that we may look into a little bit at the end, but I just kind of want to do sort of a state of the union kind of thing and just look where, because we haven't done one of these in 2 weeks, really a little more than 2 weeks, just to say like, what's even going on? What's going on with the project? So, the last 2 weeks have been a little weird because a lot of it's been about like validating ideas or playing with hardware or whatever. So I don't know that I've advanced concepts very much in the last 2 weeks, but we'll just go through and take a look at what's up. So this was, this is the outline I had for my talk with them. And so I'll just go through it as I went through it, and then kind of at the end of it, talk about some things that I came away from that were helpful. So the first thing I talked about was further visual exploration. And if you've watched the streams, you've seen this developing, but I think that the big changes in the last couple of weeks were, maybe we were getting into this area of just like beautiful radial forms, man-made and natural. And I started moving more into forms that were, well, less about forms maybe and more about compositions of objects. So things like this, where it's about not necessarily an individual object with a form that has radial symmetry, but many, many, many objects placed together. So this work is done by an artist, I think Susan Drummond is the name, I hope I got that right, who does just these amazingly intricate, beautiful arrangements of objects. And I mean, you know, they're stunning to look at. And I think a lot of the work that we've been doing that, you know, tends towards sort of kaleidoscopic compositions, there's a connection with this, but it's physical objects. So I definitely was getting interested in like, well, what about, can we find a way to bring physical objects into this? And we'll talk about that more in a minute. And then I was also looking at sort of compositions of compositions. And what I mean by that is what happens if you take a bunch of things that are sort of individual creations, how do you show them together? Like, what do you do to create a composition of compositions? And that's kind of the reference. That's where I was moving towards. And looking at these found object mandalas had me thinking, at least for a few days, I was very interested in the idea of like, well, what could we do with found objects? Because some of these they're just gorgeous. They're just incredibly beautiful things. So I got interested in those, and I got interested in these like collections of radial compositions, or even just collections of like, what's it like to just collect a bunch of things, almost to show a bunch of specimens, or almost. So that was kind of some visual reference, and we also had some reference for the fixture. I think a bit less, because I stepped back a little bit from the fixture, still thinking, yeah, it's a thing you gather around. You know, you gather around something and you do something. And it still is not entirely clear to me, still, at this late date, whether you gather around and everyone is operating on the same plane or on the same, you know, field, like you would see here, or whether everyone gathers around, but each individual person kind of has their own point of contact, their own point of input. I don't know where you can see this, but like people gathered around, and each of them in this case has their own little screen. Here's a better image of that. You gather around something, but you're not interacting with the main field in the middle. You're doing something on the periphery. So I have some thoughts on that, but frankly, again, still not totally decided. There's some nice things about that, like there's some nice things about the everybody gather round sort of thing. So I'm getting distracted by visual imagery. Let's stop that for the moment. We can do that later. So then I talked about kind of what the directions I'd been pursuing, because I'd been pursuing multiple directions, and that's kind of been a thing. That's something I tend to do because I'm a painfully indecisive person sometimes. And sometimes when I just don't know, this is something I decided on a few years ago, and I don't know if it's the best idea, but it sometimes works for me, is if you just don't know, if you're just truly torn in half about how to proceed on a project, the only way I know how to get out of that sort of cycle of analysis paralysis, where you're just overthinking it and thinking in circles, is just to follow both threads and hope that, and this has borne out. In the past, this has borne out. On this project, maybe not so much. But in the past, it's borne out that if it's like, okay, I just don't know, do I do it this way or do I do it this way? You kind of just start pursuing both. And in the process of that, hopefully find what one or the other takes precedence, and you know what to do. And that's maybe a luxury that you can't always count on. Just realized that bot made this was not running. Where are you, bot made this? Okay, glitch is loading. This machine, whenever I restart it, takes a long time to connect to the internet, and I don't know why. Like minutes. It's really weird. I've never had a computer do that. Okay, and it's plugged in. It's not even Wi-Fi. It's like hard. It's got a hard line to the router. Anyway, so yeah, these are the directions I've kind of been pursuing. So I talked about the creatures. The creatures were sort of like phase 2 of the things I was investigating, and I spent a good 2 weeks kind of in creature land. And then, but then I started thinking, like, especially after last week's check-in, or the check-in 2 weeks ago, kind of thinking like, maybe I need to pause here. Maybe the creatures aren't the right idea. Maybe they're too prescriptive. Maybe I'm not enjoying how screen focused it is. In addition to that, maybe I'm not enjoying the work, like all of this sort of 3D mesh generative stuff that we were doing. Like maybe I was just getting kind of tired of that. But I was imagining, well, maybe there's ways we could do it with some smart objects instead of, knobs and dials or touching the screen or whatever. I didn't go into that, actually. Maybe I should mention that as part of the fixture reference. Something with the fixture essence really in thinking about those, I mean, you can see some reference here, like let's grab some objects, But this one was an example of a project with physical objects that had fiducial markers on them, and use computer vision to track those markers. And so that was something I was looking into. I mean, I kind of just started thinking about that. I looked into it a little yesterday and sort of immediately felt like I wasn't into it. Because there's reasons I'm just kind of generally broadly averse to computer vision stuff and don't really enjoy it very much. But all that aside, this is a cool project. We've looked at it before, but where you throw these cubes down, these cubes have different meanings based on what is on their face, but also based on where they're positioned, how they're oriented, things like that, to create these landscapes. And we looked yesterday at there's a whole field. It's a very popular, I don't know, mid to late 2000s thing, maybe in the early 2010s, in the academic world, of these smart tables, of objects on a smart table. And I don't know, I'm just not that into that thing. That idea of a rear projection table that's looking up at some objects and you're moving those objects around. I don't know. The tangible interfaces is what you might call them, or a form of tangible interface. And they don't quite do it for me, and they feel a little dated in some ways, and I don't know. But this I thought was interesting because it did decouple that, and you're just playing with objects while looking at something else. But again, it does have a bit of a feeling of a, I mean, I don't think this is an academic project, but it's kind of in that academic world of like, I don't even know how to describe it. That's what the academic world should be, like speculation and experimentation. But sometimes a thing happens and then a lot of people do it. So I don't know. Anyway, the smart table thing is not really my jam. Sticking these coins in here though, look at that. So yeah, I'm still definitely, there's parts of my brain that are thinking very much like, well, are there some other forms of tangible interface like that that could be thought about, that could be explored? Of course there are. I mean, of course, the entire field of tangible interfaces haven't been considered, but that my brain can think of to create. There's little windows. Brooklyn Children's Museum. Cute. Okay, so that's what I meant by smart objects with the creature. So maybe you interact with the creature by like physically composing things, putting things together and seeing those things to come and appear and so on. And I'm not opposed to that fully. I don't love the idea of doing it with computer vision, just because computer vision, in my experience, is just like, it's just a field of kind of, I don't know, computer science I don't love very much. It just doesn't, I don't like it very much. And maybe part of that is because of the tools, and maybe part of that is the complexity of the setup, and the setup's a little annoying, and on and on and on and on. But it's a way, I was about to say a reliable way, but I think that's part of the problem, is I don't think it is super duper reliable. But of like, you do stuff and a computer can see it, and that happens in the world, and that's the thing that's used in real life, so it's not just like a totally, speculative academic kind of question. So, but I was trying to think like, well, what else could we think about? Like, what else could you do? What other kinds of smart objects do we have? We've been doing plenty of RFID tag kinds of things. There's lots of kinds of sensors that you could maybe figure out what you wanted to do with those sensors, but none of those are kind of jumping. I'm sorry, slightly distracted at the moment. None of those are really jumping out to me as like, oh yeah, this is the way to do it. This is what I want to do. So, and if I'm not feeling super inspired by those, I don't know if it's worth pursuing. Like, it's doing it for the sake of doing it. I don't think I'll enjoy it, and if I don't enjoy it, I think the end result will suffer. Anyway, that's all where we are on kind of the creature idea. I think there's still something about the creatures, but I kind of paused it. Then, we did those symmetrical drawing experiments, and we used myotes, and it was fun, and we've done all of these studies that are kind of just experimental, pretty eye candy sorts of things. And there is something magical about these kinds of experiences of like, oh, you touch it here, and then you see the drawing emerge. So honestly, this is where my heart is a little bit at this time. In terms of, well, we'll talk about it more in a little bit, but just as far as like some potential that I see and that I want to do. I'm drawn to this of like a tool for creating. Well, we'll talk about it more. We'll talk about it more. But symmetrical drawing experience, whatever exactly that is the other idea, and it's very much in line with the stuff we did, the leap motion experiments, things like that. Arrangements of physical objects. So this was, I did a little bit of prototyping with this, but the idea was, oh, well, what if you take real objects, and on stream I was positioning screws and nuts and bolts and whatever, and saying, what if you take those and the computer makes them radial, you know, and what happens then? And I really believe there's something to it. Like, I believe there's something to that. It would almost be like a shortcut to those beautiful found object mandalas. But I think the downsides are many. I think there's a lot of downsides. I think there's some annoying things about the kind of, again, sort of computer vision and photography parts of it, of like taking live photos of whatever objects people put down. And then at the end of the day, even if that all works perfectly, do you get the sense that I want you to have of like this sort of, oh, this is more than the sum of its parts, and something's emerged from these? May help if I showed a little bit of an illustration of what this was. But I arrange a few objects, and then the computer clones them in such a way that you hopefully are surprised and delighted by the thing that has happened. So kind of this little illustration as an example of, okay, the computer shows me a little pie slice, I put this stuff in, the computer clones it, and then maybe these pie slices go away at that point, like if they're just there as a guide. But just to say, like, oh, interesting, like what emerges when you put these things in? But my fear is that maybe it's just like a broken kaleidoscope, and I don't want to make a kaleidoscope anyway, and so yeah. I was interested in that path for a little while, and it felt good for a little while, but in my eternal indecisiveness that is plaguing me this month, I'm not feeling that one quite as much. So those are kind of the three big directions. We'll revisit those in a minute. And then a lot of what I did over the last 2 weeks was just look at hardware stuff. In the Looking Glass, I think my conclusion was, man, it's a cool thing. It's pretty magical, but it's kind of low fidelity, and it is pretty picky about how you author for it. And what I mean by that is like only certain things presented in a certain way with a kind of a certain, but not just aesthetic approach, but like conceptual approach of how you want to put things in 3D space. I think kind of only certain things look good on it. You know, like I was maybe complaining about last week, I was probably complaining about a lot of things last week, complaining that that I was feeling like, oh, suddenly I'm like bending myself over backwards to try to make something that would look good on the Looking Glass instead of making what I wanted to make, if that makes sense. So, you know, for example, I had those 2D creatures, and I don't know that I love the 2D creatures, and I don't know that the 2D creatures are the best thing I've ever made, but, well, that's kind of crazy. Sorry, my phone is getting just interesting messages. I'm gonna put my phone over here and be a little less distracted. That I was like, suddenly I'm like, okay, well, I can't just show this 2D stuff in the Looking Glass because then who cares? So now I need to show 3D stuff, and I'm going through all this stuff of this generative geometry, and we did that for days and days and days. And kind of at the end of that days and days and days, I was really thinking like, I don't know if I like this. I mean, I don't know if I want to do this. And seeing sort of the path forward of just tons of work on geometry generation. And if I felt strongly about it, like this is going to look amazing, it's going to make such an impact, it will be so lovely, but I don't necessarily feel that way. And so, you know. So, and then Leap Motion had some, I like the Leap Motion. It has some similar finickiness. Like, I don't think it's really good for kind of fine motor sorts of things, like that you really want to like do intricate things. I think it's pretty fun to just move your hands around and poke them. And that's not entirely true. Like we saw there's some gestures you could do and things like that, but I didn't feel like for the things I was imagining doing that it was really the best input, and that it was maybe, so the summary of that is like, maybe these are better, maybe I want to do something different with these, and maybe I'll do like a mini project or something, but I don't think these are the things I want to do. And then another big, another big area of sort of exploration was figuring out like, okay, if I can't use a projection, which it feels like a projection's not going to work in this space. It's just too bright in there. That whole building is very bright and lovely, but it seems a washed out projection sounds bad to me. And even looking on the stream yesterday, we saw a fair number of those, of things that were seemingly like, oh, that's a pretty interesting interactive, or that's a pretty interesting thing someone has created. But it was in such a bright room that the projections were so blown out. I don't know if I probably don't have any references for that in Pinterest. I mean, even this is a pretty cool thing, but it's pretty blown out. Like just how desaturated and kind of dull everything is. And so this one's cool. This one's great, but it's in a controlled lighting environment.
I felt respected.
The lighting is much more under control to make this happen. And you'll find that in a lot of these spaces, I think. I mean, is this a project? I don't know, whatever this is, it's really washed out. I don't know if this is real or if it's pretend, but it's real washed out, whatever it is. So, yeah, I mean, even these projections up here, just so washed. I don't like the way washed out projections look. These rear projections look very nice, but they're in very dark spaces. And, you know, we even looked, you know, if we could find ambient light reducing technology and all of that sort of thing, but wait, what are these? Look at these. Wait, what was that? What are these little creatures? Oh, these are just like fun light table collages. Oh, it's those same little kids, or who I assume to be little kids. Okay, don't get distracted by art. So projections seemed not great. Then I was looking at kind of LED-based displays, not LCD, LED displays. And there's some cool ones, like for DJ, you know, stage lighting and that kind of thing. But there's some combination of too expensive or too low resolution or whatever. Like they're just not made to be seen up close. Like even in this picture where you're a few feet away, probably on stream it might look like crazy Morier. I'm bad at saying that word, patterns. But yeah, these are designed to be multiple feet away, I think. And so, and they're pretty expensive. And so they're cool and I like them. And I'm not totally turned off on these. Like there's some version of this I can maybe imagine, but if we really want to show pictures of a thing and you're going to be a couple feet from that thing, I don't know. These don't feel like the, unfortunately, these are probably not the thing. They're cool. They can be big. They can be far away. But I mean, even look at how low res that is. So yeah, small. So the low resolution, and then there are options, of course. If you pay millions of dollars or tens of thousands or maybe hundreds of thousands, you can certainly have a very custom, very nice LED or really dense LED or even maybe LCD panel in whatever shape you want, but those are out of reach. And so I did some explorations to say like, well, what are my options for a round display? What are my options here? And so one of them is take a big TV, like a 55-inch TV, and mask it in a way that you are then required to have a really huge bezel. Take two smaller TVs and mask them, but then you have a seam, and you have to deal with that seam. And I was thinking, like, well, what if I just always have hexagonal symmetry? But I don't know. I don't know about that. Or, of course, it's just a big table, and you gather around the table, and you do your thing around the table. But I don't think it's a touch table. I don't know. I don't want to make a smart table. I feel pretty confident in that. Like, I don't think that's the thing I want to make. So, anyway, and exploring with those, maybe the least offensive one is this one, even though it has this big border. But maybe that's good, because maybe if you have this big space and you're doing something physical in this space, even if there is another, say there is a screen down here. What are you doing? you know, say this is a little small friendly screen, and it is a touch screen, or it's whatever, then you can work on this one, and maybe those are all the way around, or whatever. So this is where this is feeling like what the thing is going to be, but it's hard to say because there's still so many decisions I have not made. And then also this idea of like, oh, on the wall showing specimens or something separate from this thing. So thinking about it, definitely thinking about it. And then I did a few more studies, which you have seen if you've been following along, based on, they were, the first two were leap motion based. So this fun little guy of swirling your fingers around and kind of casting magical spells. So I still might do this for like a looking glass leap motion experience, maybe. I don't know that these kind of like glowy particles are really the thing to do on that little friend, but I could see something like this adapting and being pretty fun, or something like this where you're kind of dipping your fingers into water. Sorry if this is super loud. Hopefully it's not stupendously, shockingly loud. Oh, it looks kind of loud though. So there was that guy, and then the most recent one we did was kind of like an Etch-a-Sketch, but a color coordinate Etch-a-Sketch. And this has crazy animations happening, but kind of a polar coordinate Etch-a-Sketch. So, okay. So given all of that, I want to have a little check-in here and say, these are my high-level ideas, as vague as they are, and just talk about them a little bit. So one idea is the creature creator. You're a visitor, you come into the museum, you create a creature. How do you create that creature? Maybe it's a parametric thing. Maybe there's just one dial and it's a multi-step thing and you pick. Maybe you use physical objects in some way. Or maybe you use, I was thinking last night about a genetic approach where you're kind of breeding these creatures to get the creature that you want. So whatever that is, it's about everybody creates a creature and everybody adds their creature to some kind of environment, where all these organisms live, and they continue to live on. There's still things I like about that. There's still things I'm drawn to about it. Maybe the worst thing about it, here's the things about it that aren't great. It's a fundamentally screen-based experience. Like, you're creating a creature on a screen. Even if you're using stuff, you're creating a creature on a screen. But at this point, it feels like everything we're talking about is a screen-based experience, so maybe that's not that big of a deal. I don't feel super strongly about any of those techniques to create the thing. Like, about which of the techniques is the right technique to make the thing. Whether it is, I mean, simplest version, a bunch of sliders like we've done on stream before. We have that little, oh, you know that thing? This thing where you would slide sliders to sort of do some parameters. And we wouldn't do that in real life. We'd have something a bit more interesting than some sliders. But like, it's parametric, a parametric version of this where you pick the options. Another option is where it's sort of like you have all of your options and their physical objects. Say we do the computer vision thing and you put those down and you see your creature appear. So there's that version of it. Or there's the version where there's creatures all around the edge here that have slightly different traits, like different numbers of eyeballs or whatever. And I pick them and I breed it with this creature. And that's how I get the creature I want, which I think is interesting. Like that feels kind of weird and cool. Sort of like, rather than saying like, oh, I want my creature to be green, it's more like, well, you can't unless you find a yellow creature and a blue creature and you make them have a creature baby or whatever, you know? So I think there's potential there that could be interesting and kind of weird and kind of cool, but you create a creature. And then, so what is the work there? That's like coming up going further with our parametric creature creator, whatever those art assets are, whatever the tech is to build and like create those art assets, whatever the tech is to assemble those art assets, whatever the logic is that goes into sort of our genetic approach to this or our parametric approach. Like there's a lot of work to do there, but it seems like it's achievable work. These are all solvable problems, of course. And then what? But then what? So that's one of the things that worries me a lot about this project. It's kind of, you know, if you're in middle school and you go up to this thing and you make your creature, if you've been playing video games, normally when you create something in a video game, you'd be like, all right, I made my character, now let's do stuff. Like, I did this, now let me see what's going to happen. Whereas this wouldn't really be that. Like, once you create your creature, it's not yours anymore. I mean, it's yours. You kind of own it. You could have a way to scan a QR code or whatever and take your creature with you or whatever. If I built like a, what is it, Tamagotchi kind of thing. Or maybe they just live together in a shared environment on the screen and they all swim together and do creature dances and whatever. So there's a version of that, all of those things that work. No question. There's versions of all of those things that work. It's just, do I like it? Do I want to do it? Do I like it enough to want to do it? Is the real impasse here. So there's that. And then there's the radial drawing activity. And the idea is it's a shared drawing experience. Either we all have our own screens and we're doing something and that all contributes, or we're acting in some way upon the main screen and everybody works together. And it could be you touch it or you have knobs and dials or you have objects or whatever. And it's about creating not creatures. So maybe there's less of an expectation that that creature is going to be alive and you take care of it or whatever. But creating, essentially just creating radial artworks, like creating a sort of evolving collection of radial artworks. And maybe there's actually a fair amount of overlap between the two of these, you know? Whereas the creatures is more about a given set of parameters or genes that you would combine to get your creature. Whereas the radial drawing would be like a constrained drawing activity that had, you know, a huge number of outcomes, but not an infinite number of outcomes, and there'd be training wheels to make it work. So, and then there's the object, and I'm feeling pretty done with this one. Like this, unless I come up with a way to do it that is not computer vision-y and is not like maybe underwhelming, then that one feels like I'm less interested in this one. I mean, it's more like, I mean, in fact, this one almost could be absorbed into this if we find a way to create our creature with objects. So the distinction is, in this case, I create a visual language for creatures, and I come up with like sets of parameters and traits for those creatures. And I give you some way to mix and match that so that there's hopefully just millions or billions of combinations and it doesn't look like all the same creature. We had a pretty good start on that. Like, we had a reasonable start on it, conceptually, if not code-wise. And because I do think a lot of the work we were doing trying to make them 3D was maybe, I think it was useful work, but I don't think it's work that's going to be used in this. I mean, I'm glad I know how to do those things, but I don't know that work is going to contribute to this particular project. So, so that's what that means. The radial drawing activity is more like, it's a drawing experience. It's a creative experience. It's a creative act. You sit down or stand up and lean over and you create your artwork, and there's enough play, there's enough room in that system to create a huge range of very diverse things. And maybe there's animated brushes and just different interesting ways to pick colors and whatever. But it's like it's a radial art machine, essentially. So there's that. And you still maybe share them, and still they maybe show up as exhibits, and maybe they do kind of look like little creatures or whatever. But it's less about creating like a little character, like a little character creature, and it's more about just creating artworks with a constrained tool. So what that brings up, and it actually brings it up in both directions, both of these directions. So something I said without really thinking about it, but I said on the call was, well, one of the reasons I'm worried about the creature creators, it feels very prescriptive, because it's like, I'm going to design what the creatures look like, and then you're maybe not exactly just putting parts together, but not too much from that. It's almost like a set of toys and you're just sticking your parts together. And it feels a little limiting, and it didn't feel great. But Greg Witt from the museum said that in his opinion, what has made some of my past work successful is that it was prescriptive. And in particular, my work with music, because I've done a lot of work with music where the goal is essentially, with many of these projects, that you feel like you have agency to create music. Like, you're going to make sound. You're going to do something and it's going to make sound. And whether you know anything about music, it's going to sound musical. And I've had some success with that, I would say, to create things where people feel like, oh yeah, that seems like a thing. That feels like you gave me a toolkit and I created something that sounds like music. So, and I have some confidence to do that with music. Like, I feel like I have a mental toolkit of like, these are ways to give a person, you know, agency and feel like they're being creative, because they have agency and they are being creative. There's just sort of an invisible hand that's making sure things sound good. There's an invisible hand making sure that everything's on tempo, you know, on the beat, making sure that everything, the chords play that fit together and are kind of musical, and on and on and on. So, so in thinking about that, I'm realizing like, well, I need that in either one of these. In fact, maybe in this one more so than this one, because this one, I mean, I need it in both, but this one, it's not exactly the point. Like, the point of this one is not exactly that, oh, I created a visual artwork. It's like, I created a creature, and like, that creature may have some behaviors, or maybe I did this weird genetic thing to create the creature. So the visual outcome is not quite, you don't need to feel maybe as much like you're the full author of the visual look of this creature, because you are the author of the existence of the creature. I don't know if that's making sense. What's another way to put that? Well, let me contrast it to this. Like, if you just put your finger on a screen and the software just draws a landscape, like a picture of an owl, like say you put your finger on the screen and suddenly an owl is drawn. It's like, I had nothing to do with this. Like, this is a trick. I didn't do anything. It's like, or like with the music example, it's like I just hit play and the music played. It's like I didn't do anything but hit a play button, right? I had no agency in this. I didn't pick the note or the order of the note or anything. I don't feel like I actually created anything. But on the other hand, you can't just sit somebody who doesn't know anything about music in front of a piano and say, make something great. Like, so it's delicate. You've got to kind of walk the line in between those, where it feels open-ended and you have some choice and you have some agency, but not so much agency that you can't operate, that you can't make something good. And with music, you know, you could say like, okay, that means you give them some different voices, or there's some different notes, or some different tempos, different options. And you feel like you're making music because you're sort of using this kit of parts to put something together. And that's a little harder with visual art, I think. Because the more choices I make for you, like say, for example, that I wanted to make sure that the color palette was always good. So I was going to be in charge of the color palette, not you. Then it's like I've fully taken that away. And it's like suddenly, well, now, okay, I drew my circle, but you decided it was red. Like my choices when it's a visual medium maybe feel like they have more impact than if it's an auditory medium, because you see it right in front of you and people are such visual creatures. So what that means for both projects is that this one becomes a major like conceptual effort on my part to, whatever the tools are to build a creature, to really feel like you have an insane number of options. And that may be an undertaking that I just don't want to take. You know, to get it, you know, to like spore levels or something, which is like, yep, you can make a creature. It's going to look and do exactly what it is. Like, you did it. Versus like, oh, there's really only like 3 kinds of creatures. And you just really you pick their colors and you pick their number of legs or whatever. And that's what the options are. And after 10 people use it, everybody's creatures are like, kind of the same. Like, it's kind of, it'd be a little hard to pick my creature out of a lineup, maybe. If it's that constrained. But if it's not that constrained, then it's like, well, this kid didn't draw a creature. This visitor decided to draw a shoe or whatever. Like, it's too open. And people who aren't able to draw or don't want to engage with it in that way don't feel like they get a result. So those are... It's funny because I can talk myself into this one and out of this one like that. It's pretty amazing how quickly and easily I can talk myself into and out of that particular idea. It really might mean I don't want to do it. The radial drawing activity, in light of this idea of the music making activity, or activities that I've done where it's like, you do a thing and it's going to sound okay. Like, it's probably going to sound okay. And I've done a fair number of those things. Enough to, and I actually did do some like procedural drawing stuff years and years ago that I didn't really end up releasing, but I've done stuff like that as well, where I have a reasonable degree of confidence that I feel like I could build a framework that you would approach it and you would start to create something and you would be able to create something that you thought was lovely, hopefully, but that had enough room to be distinct from what other people created. Then the problem is like, what does it mean? Like, what's the point? Like, what are you doing? Is this just a drawing tool? Because the real downside of this one is, even if it is done successfully, it's like, well, why is this in a museum? Like, why does this have a physical fixture if this thing could be an iPad app? Like, if you could just do this on an iPad, what's the point of actually doing it here? And that's kind of true for, I mean, it's tough when you're dealing with screens. You have to deal with that question until you find a way to say, like, well, it's because of this. It's because of X, Y, or Z that it actually is better, that X, Y, or Z makes it better if you have a physical presence, because it's bigger, because there's objects you can manipulate with your hands, because there's the opportunity for other people to hands-on directly play with it there with you, next to you, whether it's your friend or your classmate or your parent or a total stranger, like, that you could engage and work on this thing together. So that's where I am. That's where I am right now, is there's these two directions and both of them have a list of pros and cons that in my mind is like almost perfectly balanced, is almost perfectly weighted. Because and there really is a I'm kind of covering this, sorry. There's also the big question of what do I want to do? You know, because if I'm enjoying what the work is, I will do a better job of it. That's just a true thing, I think. And I don't have that answer right now. And maybe that's for what because of the reasons I described at the beginning of this, where I just, the state of the world is, state of the world, state of the country, state of my health, those things are just making it a bit difficult to make these decisions. And I've done enough work and made enough things that I have definitely been in the positions where sometimes it's like, you know what? I have a certain amount of time and I have a certain amount of resources, and this is the idea I have right now. And so you just start moving forward on that idea. So I could do that today, right? Like today I could pick this idea or this idea and I could just start moving forward on it and after a certain number of weeks or months, it would be a finished project. But there's a lot of question of like, well, how pleased will I be with the result of that project? And how stressed out or annoyed will I be with the process of creating it? And then what is the thing? Like, what does that thing offer to the world as a new, as this creation, as a new citizen of the world? What does it do for people? What does it offer? And those are all questions right now that I just am having trouble answering, to be totally honest with you. So yeah, so some part of me thinks that the path forward is I have to pause this anyway, and I have to take a little break, and maybe by taking a little break, I can find some clarity. And maybe, the thing that would be lovely, the thing that would actually be the ideal, is that in the process of taking a break, I realize what the underlying thing here is that I really am interested in, which seems to be about radial symmetry and the implications of that, but that there's some concept that's a little more concrete, and that I am then able to say, oh, that's what this is about. This is what I care about, and this is what I've been thinking about, and that will give me guidance on how to execute what it is in a way that I don't quite have at the moment. Or I just have some epiphany, say over the next 2 months, about how to execute this or this. Like where it's suddenly clear to me, it's like, oh, you know what? I could do the creatures by doing X, Y, or Z, and it would be 1,000 times better, and I would feel better about it. Or like, oh, I have a great idea for the radial drawing activity. And as it stands, I don't have that right now. And it's tough because there's some truths I know of that I think are truths, at least, with creating things. And one of them is that there's a point that it's good to be in your head, and then there's a point where it's good to get out of your head and just start doing work. And so some part of me is like, no, you need to just pick one of these and work on it. Some part of me is like, it doesn't matter, because there's some part of me that really actually believes that the idea is not what matters. It's the work and the execution that goes into it. And that even, I don't exactly mean the idea doesn't matter. It's sort of like the starting point isn't that important, because you'll do so much work along the way to hone and refine it that the starting point would almost be irrelevant. I mean, that's already sort of true with this project. When you think of what our starting point was waving our phones in the air, it's like that was our starting point, and we've moved pretty dramatically from that just through a process of, introspection and exploration, I guess. So I know that to be true, or I believe it to be true, that the initial idea is not always the thing that matters, and it's what emerges in the process of the work sometimes that is actually the real work, like the real thing. Like you discover, like, oh, this is what I'm really trying to do, and I just have not experienced that yet with this particular project, and I don't have an excuse for that other than the state of the world and the state of my health. Like that's all I can offer. Like there's no other mystical force working against me. It's nobody's fault but my fault. And it's how it is. So I need to just figure out how to deal with that. And right now the way to deal with it feels like maybe a little distance from these ideas, and because I can pick these ideas up again when it's time to start working on the project again. But I'm also not opposed to the idea of something new, just a new direction, a new epiphany, a new way of thinking about the core, about the things here that are interesting to me, about the core things that are interesting to me here, and pulling that out. And I can tell you that as I say that, a core interest of mine is certainly those, the feeling of giving people, or the idea of giving people the feeling that they have created something that is theirs, that they have authored something, but it has just enough invisible guidance to kind of make sure that thing is good. That's worthwhile to me. in either of these scenarios. And so maybe that's the thing I will endeavor to reflect upon. Okay, so I think I'm going to stop it there. And I honestly don't know if I'm going to stream tomorrow. If I do, it might be on kind of like another topic, because I think I just need to pause on this and think about it a little bit, because neither one of these feel quite right. I mean, in some ways, this feels like the smoother path, like the easier path, the path where I have some momentum, just because so much of what we've been creating, all the studies are kind of, or many of the studies, kind of like push in this direction of like, build a thing and you use it and you'll make something and you will enjoy what you make. But there's still problems with that idea as well. Okay, so I guess if this is to be, which I don't know if it is, but it might be, the last residency stream for a while, like maybe a couple months even. I want to thank everybody who has stopped by. I want to thank everybody who's watched on YouTube. I will probably continue streaming, maybe even streaming some other museum projects that I'm working on in the last few weeks. But for the residency project, just to like put a slight coda, even though it's not done, at least on this stretch of it, just thank everybody that's helped me, thank everyone at the museum that's helped me, and thank everybody that has sort of paid attention and talked to me about the project and come along and looked at stuff and all of that. So thank you for that. And it may well be that tomorrow I'm just like, oh wait, I actually want to make a thing. So who knows? But just so there's like the opportunity for a little closure here, let's have a little closure here. So have a lovely evening and have a lovely day and week and month and year. And I will talk to you soon, I'm sure. Some kind of stream, certainly. So have a lovely day and thank you again.